Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 78, The Siege of Emon. I want to thank everybody for their patience. Odwick was right. In my last video he mentioned it might be tough to get this video out at the end of June, and sure enough, the last week before I filmed this was kind of crazy, so rather than busting my butt to get the video out on a Thursday, I gave myself a pass to release it this week instead. But the only reason I feel comfortable doing that is because of all of the tremendous support I've received from this community throughout this past year, where you've been very clear that you don't mind how long it takes to get one of these videos out, you're just happy whenever you see one. I personally would still love to stick to a more consistent schedule. That is definitely going to be my goal going forward. It just makes me a lot happier to have that routine. But I definitely don't feel that same pressure from the audience that I know a lot of other YouTubers do, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I also want to thank my audience for all of the very kind comments I got at the end of my last Demystified video, where I took a tangent into talking about politics some more. There were a few people who brought up some very valid criticisms. I think they were very reasonable. I understood where they were coming from, and those led to some really lovely conversations. There were also, of course, some less productive discussions in the comments. That's always going to happen, especially whenever I talk about politics, but the majority of the comments were really supportive. And even in those cases where the comments were less helpful, whenever I hit a point where I was just like, oh wait, this isn't going anywhere useful, I could just dip out. Like whenever people try to bring up Obama's and Biden's border policies being like the same as Trump's, basically saying, oh, you just don't like Trump's policies because you don't like Trump, because Obama and Biden did the same thing. That person is kind of doing lazy whataboutism to essentially accuse me of Trump derangement syndrome. But they're also demonstrating that they don't actually have any idea what people on the left really believe. Because, no, I didn't approve of Biden's or Obama's border policies either. I think the Democrats are generally terrible on the border. But the reason I think Trump is worse is, well, first of all, he does things that are more severe, worse. The wall was worse. The mass deportations are worse. He's also bragging about the cruelty of his policies. His administration is literally violating court orders, detaining US citizens, violating due process, and shipping people off to a foreign gulag famous for human rights abuses. He's worse. This is the frustrating thing about living in the Trump era, because during the 2020 debate, when Biden brought up the fact that Trump was putting kids in cages, Trump responded that Obama built the cages. And yes, that is a problem. It's a problem that our border policy was not radically different under the Democrats than it was under the Republicans. It's a problem that the news only covers that border policy under two conditions. Either when a Republican like Trump or Greg Abbott does something truly heinous, or when Republicans are trying to paint Democrats as having open borders when that's not the case. But there's no regular, reasonable accountability for Democrats on the issue of the border. That's a good point. But Trump is not the person to make that point. He has absolutely no place criticizing Democrats for being too draconian in their border policies, because his are worse. They're always worse. Because not only are his policies far more cruel, deliberately so, as political theater to satisfy his base by punishing the foreigners they don't like, making ASMR videos of people in chains getting on planes as red meat for his base. But also, if you do actually care about border security and deportations, and you think that's the solution, Trump's deportation numbers in the first half of the year were actually lower than Biden's. Because not only is it evil to take the tactics they're currently taking, but it's also less efficient at actually getting done the things you want to get done. And let's be super clear here, I would ordinarily be very happy with the fact that deportations are down. I think that's generally a good thing. But the fact that the numbers are lower, and they're also violating the Constitution and violating human rights and turning it into this huge spectacle, makes it pretty clear that the entire purpose of their policy is not actually to run a government in any sort of efficient way. It's to be cruel to their perceived enemies and to be seen doing so. The Democrats have some very serious problems. We'll talk about more of those later in this video. Biden's foreign policy was so bad he literally funded a genocide. Don't put me in a position where I have to defend Joe Biden. The left does not like Joe Biden. But that being said, Trump is not only continuing or escalating all of the worst Democrat policies and getting rid of the good ones, like advancements in green energy, but he's also openly fascist, and the Republicans are either enablers at best or full-on collaborators at worst. So they are just worse than the Democrats. So no, it's not some gotcha to point out the Democrats are also bad or have some bad policies, and it's not hypocrisy to say that Trump's immigration policy is worse than the Democrats. But you know what? This is the nature of YouTube comments. You're gonna get a lot of feedback, and I do want to engage with a lot of it in good faith. But of course, sometimes a comment thread gets to the revealing point where there's not really any purpose in trying to engage in good faith debate anymore, because someone else just has accepted dehumanizing rhetoric about immigrants, for example. I got to one point with one commenter where they said they didn't care if undocumented immigrants got due process or not. Like, it shouldn't apply to them at all, because his argument was, if they didn't come here legally, if they don't respect our laws, why should they be protected by our laws? And it's really easy to debunk this argument. First of all, the majority of undocumented immigrants didn't sneak across the border. Their visas just expired, so they did come here legally. Second, even if an immigrant crosses the border without going through the proper channels, that's a civil offense. It's like a parking ticket or jaywalking. It's kind of overstating it to say that these immigrants don't respect our laws. Third, all the credible studies on immigrants in America confirm that immigrants commit far fewer crimes than non-immigrants. And that's especially true for undocumented immigrants, because obviously it is. They wouldn't want to risk breaking the law because they don't want anyone to find out they're here without proper documentation. So immigrants actually respect our laws more than native-born citizens. But honestly, all of these pesky little facts are actually a distraction from the more relevant arguments against that kind of comment. Because due process means if you're accused of a crime, you have the opportunity to go to court and defend yourself. So if you don't believe undocumented immigrants should receive due process, you're effectively saying, yeah, I don't care if they actually committed a crime or not. I'm comfortable deporting them if they're even accused of a crime. And so if you just don't think they should have their day in court, if you just think anybody should be able to say, I want that person gone, I'm going to accuse them of a crime, whether or not they committed it, and then boom, they're disappeared by secret police. If that's how you think the system should work, you and I are not going to have a fruitful discussion on the topic. I also want to give a shout out to the one commenter on one of my community posts who basically tried to argue that the situation in Gaza isn't a genocide, that the situation there is far too complex and I just don't understand it. But no, it's a genocide, and we all know it's a genocide. Any argument that says otherwise is a smokescreen trying to justify it, calling pro-Palestine protesters supporters of Hamas, or claiming it's anti-Semitic to accuse Israel of a genocide when that's obviously what they're doing and it has nothing to do with them being Jewish, arguing that the people of Gaza hate America or hate gay people, or whatever argument you think means we'll be okay with them being killed. All of that is just the horrible rationalization you've come up with or latched onto because it makes you comfortable with what's happening so you can sleep at night while our tax dollars fund a genocide. Collective punishment is a war crime, and there's absolutely nothing any children in Gaza could have done or could ever do that would justify what's being done to them. So when that viewer ended their comment by saying they couldn't consider me a good person anymore if I continue to call the events in Gaza a genocide, then, you know, I think I can live with that. Oh, and I got some comments from people who don't love the political discussion in my videos, but they at least appreciate that it's separated out into its own section, it's marked with time codes, and it's only at the end of the video, so they can click off if they don't care about it. And you know what? That does make sense. I understand why that's what they would like me to do going forward. So in the interest of disclosure, I am going to talk about politics in this video. There's a discussion about it at the end. We're going to talk about the Democrats. Not sure if that changes anything for people who don't want to hear about politics, because I think some of them just might not want to hear negative things about Trump. But if you don't want to hear about politics at all in this video, then good news. When we're done talking about Critical Role, you can click off to another video. Now, speaking of this episode of Critical Role, Travis was not here for this episode. I believe he was filming a scene for the first season of the Netflix Punisher show. He's one of the soldiers in the scene where they hunt down Frank Castle in the forest and get picked off one by one. He's the first one killed, and I kind of think he was hired because he's a beefy actor who's also a voice actor, and he does good screams of pain and death. So as the game opens, the party's trying to figure out where they're going to go next, partially because they can't believe they're already at the end of the story arc. Already, it's been almost a year, but you know what I mean. There are armies marching on Emon, they'll be there tomorrow night, so the party has to get ready for war and for the final assault on Thordak. And the cast is sort of daunted by how many logistics they have to figure out. Where are the armies now? What sort of resources do they have? How will they know what to do? What are they actually doing? And I kind of think Matt wasn't worried about most of that. He told the party that the armies would arrive in Emon by sundown tomorrow, in a little bit more than 24 hours. I kind of think he expected the party to just gather the allies in Whitestone they want to bring with them, Gilmore, Kima, Jarrett, Zara, Kashaw, grab any last resources they can, which Matt will provide in just a moment, and then just go to Emon. I think if he was planning to run a more elaborate challenge for the players where they had to go and recruit the allies they hope to bring into battle with them, the armies or whatever, he would have made that a more central feature of the campaign so far. Because even as they're discussing their plans and trying to figure out logistics and what the army should be doing, Matt keeps saying that they can just tell Allura what they want the armies to do and she can get a message to them magically. They're talking about scrying on the army and teleporting to where they are so they can make sure the army has the information they need, and Matt basically just keeps saying, just tell Allura what you want the armies to know, and she'll use a sending spell and fill them in. They do scry on their old keep outside of Emon, and it's still standing, there's nobody there, although Matt had Keyleth roll a perception check for that, and she rolled double ones, so if there is anything to see, she just doesn't see it. So it's time to go recruit some allies. Lady Kima is already on board, Vax will talk to Gilmore, Vex will talk to Zara, Scanlan will need to talk to Jarrett, Percy needs to fix his guns, Pike and Grog are NPCs today, so that leaves Keyleth to recruit Kashaw. Mary Elizabeth is actually at the game. So when they recruit Zara, she's there at the table. And of course, Wilfredell is also there.
How's it going, man?
Everything's been great. Life's been awesome. What can I help you with?
Wow, okay, Cash. I'm sensing just a little bit of underlying aggression.
Really? It's underlying?
Okay, look. I know we kind of fucked you with the whole. Look, man.
Really? Why don't you just send me out to get some milk? Go save the world while I'm out there doing that.
So obviously, Cashaw is pissed that they sent him all the way to Vasselheim. He negotiated with the Slayer's Take, came back with the information they needed so they could use a monster to rough up Voragal, but then Voragal had already been killed. But also, Wilfredell wasn't there for any of that. That was all when he was an NPC under Matt's control. But Will has learned about it, and he's incorporating it into his role-playing for this session. And I just really love the way he does that. He does not want to give Keyleth the time of day, but he also isn't completely closed off to the idea of helping. He makes Keyleth work for it. He literally debates her on every reason she gives for why he should help. But the minute she says Zara is joining them for the fight, Will says, I'm in. Because he still knows he's playing D&D, so at a certain point, you've got to play along. And you just have to have your own rationalization and reason for doing so. Scanlan goes to Jarrett, and he agrees to come along on the quest to kill Thordak. And then Jarrett provides the drugs that Scanlan asked him to get on the condition that he never asks him to do this again.
Wait, are you a cop? You have to tell me if you're a cop. Are you a cop?
No.
Okay, good.
It's a myth for the kids at home, by the way. Just want to get that up. Sorry. Just can't fill their heads with bad ideas. Carry on.
Percy's gun, bad news, was broken, but he fixes that, and then he asks Cassandra for any healing potions Whitestone might have. But they've already pretty well depleted Whitestone of any sort of healing potions, but Matt was already going to help with this. Drake Thunderbrand approaches because he and a few others have scrounged together some potions for the party, 3 greater and 1 basic. But Drake is also an elementalist, so he has brewed 4 potions of fire resistance, which is huge. They only last for an hour, so they shouldn't drink them too early, they should wait for the right moment. And as a side note, it would be really nice if getting into the city was full of lots of other fire-based hazards, so there was actually a consequence to not drinking these potions yet. Like, what if there were random fire elementals lingering around the edge of the city, or salamanders in the sewers patrolling for the resistance? That would have been nice. Meanwhile, Vax goes to recruit Gilmore. Now, how is Matt going to explain that someone like Gilmore, who doesn't really go into a lot of fights, is going to join them for this, the most epic fight of all the epic fights? Well, Gilmore says he was there when all this started, and the dragon destroyed not just his livelihood that he had spent his entire life building, but also killed several of his friends. So he'll be honored and happy to join them for the siege. It's a smart solution from Matt. I like it a lot. The party starts redistributing their magic items to see who can use each one the best. There's a potion of speed, the potion of invulnerability, and the Dragon Slayer longsword, which Matt ruled could be used as a dexterity weapon when Percy was using it, which now means he's basically stuck allowing Vax to get sneak attack with it if he chooses to use it himself. But the problem with that is it would require him unattuning to one of his iconic items, the armor, or the boots, or the new dagger, Whisper.
So, just very briefly, what is the plan?
The plan, as I understand it, is we send a vicious army to attack at the gates all over the place, drawing out Thordak's forces in an epic battle. Blood, sinew, and gore everywhere while we slip under the city, unbeknownst to Thordak, in the tunnels with the clasp leading us right to the center of town, where we pop up and surprise Thordak. He didn't know we were coming. He thought that there was an army at the gates, and we'd stab him real quick and leave.
And you said we're going into tunnels? Does anyone know the way through the tunnels?
The clasp does. They're an order of rogues and thieves who hate us, but they're going to help us.
Well, we trust them.
We totally trust them because they're scoundrels and liars.
So you want to go in and corner the dragon
Where he lives and is most powerful.
Where he lives and is most powerful.
Yes.
His back to the wall, no escape.
He can escape at any moment. He can fly.
Just us, though, not the entire army, which
Just
we're using
a
as a
partial
diversion.
group. Yes.
Well, here's the interesting
But
thing.
the scoundrels are going to lead us to
Well,
it.
he has his own army.
Of course.
So
going to
we need to
distract
keep
them.
his army distracted so we're not fighting a dragon and an army.
But you're engaging all of your forces in one play. If he holds his forces back, why not send in skirmishes to see what happens first?
We have people
Oh, I like
to do
this
that.
plan. He's good.
No, we have people that we can do for that. It's not just one army we have groups of them technically. I was
And
just
I
really
imagine we
enjoying
want to
this.
attack from different sides.
Are you
to
attacking
demonstrate
at one
all
place?
signs of
Oh no,
chaos.
all
different
around the
places.
city.
Oh, all right.
Chaos.
Is there a weak point?
I don't know.
Sadly,
Our plan.
Sadly, the
You feint the city. Send skirmishes in to feint the city so they don't know where the main attack is coming from.
Maybe split
They
it
don't
by
have to
army.
defend every wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
What you then do, once they're doing, because they have to defend any wall, they won't know where the serious attack is coming from. Then you send them towards one fortified position.
Yeah.
That will draw everybody to the one fortified position, but that's also a feint. Then you come in the back door. That's always the way you do it.
If we can
Meanwhile,
have smaller
we'll take
armies
the
flank.
scoundrels and liars, and hopefully they're going to take us to corner the giant thing that wants to kill all of us in the place where he's the most
Yeah, that one.
I love this idea.
I'm actually very okay with this.
Yeah, yeah.
we need
Have
to
him
make-
talk to
Have him
people.
with us always.
Percy keeps saying that this is as much of a plan as we need because 10 minutes in, the plan is going to fall apart anyway. I don't know what the moment was, but at some point in this campaign, he seems to have concluded that if their planning scenes run for too long, there's not much more benefit to them. I really don't agree with that mindset, and yes, admittedly, this is coming from the guy who loves watching the episodes where Vox Machina makes plans. I like coming up with plans and talking through all the options. So if other players don't enjoy that, then that's totally fair. I've been at tables where I realized I was basically slowing down the game by trying to talk through all the different options, and the other players weren't really enjoying that. So I had to sort of set that attitude aside. But I also really can't get behind Percy's philosophy that it's fine to just keep the plan as vague as possible because the specifics are never going to matter. You don't know which parts of the plan are going to succeed or fail, so you might as well plan for success, because then if part of the plan falls apart, maybe there are other parts of the plan that are still usable. You don't have to throw out everything because you actually have some contingencies. He seems to follow the philosophy of no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, which is a very famous expression, adapted slightly by Mike Tyson for one of his famous quotes, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." But no disrespect to Tyson, there's another quote that I like a whole lot more, from Dwight D. Eisenhower. "Plans are nothing, the planning is everything." Also, by sheer coincidence, I recently rewatched a Matt Colville video where he said exactly the same thing. He quoted the first quote, and then pointed out that he preferred the second quote. I had already written this section of the script, but I just wanted to highlight how great minds think alike. And also, I added the Mike Tyson quote. Now, the party wants to go and meet with the army and talk through the plan, but before they leave, Vex has them eat a hero's feast. They have Pike cast the spell since she's currently an NPC. The feast can't feed everybody, so they have to choose between Jarrett or Kima. And they choose Kima because Jarrett can hang back with a crossbow and not be as close to the danger. They ask Allura about where the army is because they might want to go and talk to the leader in person. Kashaw particularly has lots of questions about the troops on the ground, but she can answer some of those questions since she's been in touch with the military leaders. She says that there are 2,000 soldiers. All of them are foot soldiers, unfortunately, because given the time constraint, they just weren't able to put together any other forces, any other siege equipment or things like that, and their horses and beasts of burden actually fled during the Conclave attack. I'm not really sure the timing of that makes sense, since presumably this army would be mobilizing in Singorn, which was untouched by the Conclave attack, but whatever, I think it's a decent justification for why there are only foot soldiers, and the reason why he's doing that is something we'll talk about in a minute. Sam keeps asking if there's some sort of elite strike force, some awesome SWAT team they can take with them under the city. That's something he's wanted for most of this episode, to see if there's some other strike force they can recruit. And Allura gives the perfect answer to this request.
Is there an elite SWAT team task force?
I believe that's there is one, and they are called Vox Machina.
This is exactly how I think player characters should be used during large-scale battles. They're the strike team you send into situations where you can't send a full army. And so I love the way Matt turned that around on them and showed them that they are the heroes everyone else is looking for. Now, Cash has a lot of questions about the army and the resources they have, and at a certain point, I have to assume Matt did not have an answer ready for every single one of these questions. But what he does have is a goal. Make it clear that the army they've recruited is not full of idiots, but also that they're not going to solve all of the party's problems for them. 2,000 soldiers, that's a good amount. That includes the Singorn army as well as the Dusk, Gale, and Tide regiments from Fort Daxio that have been stuck in Singorn for this whole time. And they have illusionists who are concealing the army as they approach the city, which means we shouldn't get a repeat of what happened at Fort Daxio. All of them are foot soldiers, so we don't have airborne units on griffins or wyverns, we don't have siege equipment, so this battle is not going to be completely won by the armies the party has recruited. They still need to kill Thordak in order to end this war. Kashaw asks if the soldiers have shields, can they form a phalanx? And yes, Matt says the Tide Regiment is the frontline shield phalanx. Now, if Matt was using one of the more robust, granular systems for mass combat we discussed in the last episode, especially if he was using Kingdoms of Warfare, that information would definitely be on the card for that unit. They would be marked as a phalanx unit. So there would be a tangible difference between these regiments once they actually hit the battlefield. But Matt isn't really going to have to worry about that, since the party plans to sneak into the city during the battle, so it's looking more and more like the battle will happen off-screen. But maybe Matt did put in a little bit of extra work in advance to not just figure out what roles these regiments would fill in a combat scenario, but what sort of equipment they would need. Like, maybe Tide was always going to be the frontline fighters, and maybe they even were always planned to use phalanx maneuvers, so they always had the shields they needed to do that. But it also completely would not surprise me if Matt heard Will ask about a phalanx, said, "Hey, that's a good idea, and just pointed at one of the regiments on his list and decided they were the Phalanx Force. Because like I said, the party intends to sneak under the city while the armors are fighting, so Matt doesn't really need to have all the details of all the armies at his fingertips. He just needs it to sound convincing so the players can trust that the siege of Emon is in good hands. Because if they don't trust that the army is in good hands, it's not going to make them feel good about leaving the army to go fight the dragon's forces. So they have to sound really capable. Catchall asks if the army is going to be attacking a fortified position, and Allura mentions that there's a wall around the city, but it was damaged during the initial attack, and it doesn't seem like it's been repaired. That was not a priority of the occupying army and their resources. They talk about how they can get a city gate open. Maybe they can use the 50 soldiers remaining from Daxio as a team that can defend the gate. Matt also tells the players that there are 8,000 to 9,000 lizard folk and 500 to 600 wyvern riders. So not only does the enemy have the numbers, but they also control the air. But Matt clarifies that they are not a heavily trained army, and besides, the wyvern riding general was killed in the attack on Fort Daxio. Boy, it would have been really nice if one of the enemies in that fight had been one specific, very dangerous and nasty lizard man riding on a wyvern, so that we actually could have felt a major significance in killing that general, and so we could have focused less on just the random foot soldiers. Thordak also has some fire giants, but the party also killed their general, and they do know that. She was referred to as a general in the last episode. I actually called her that as well in my script for that video, but I just left out that word when I actually read it aloud, but the fire giant was the general. It was mentioned once or twice. They talk about potentially using an explosive to help breach the wall, so rather than trying to defend a gate, the army can just break a wall, and that's much harder for the bad guys to deal with. And Percy should have a cask of black powder back at Greyskull Keep that could help with that problem. Now, we still don't control the air, outside of one airship that has been ping-ponging across the country as Vox Machina keeps moving their rendezvous target, but Keyleth has a solution to that problem, one that she's been reluctant to deploy, but it's gotten to the point where they need to just rip off the band-aid and do it. She can ask the Air Ashari for help, but Allura has never met Corrin, the leader of the Air Ashari, so she can't send him a magical message remotely. But since Vox Machina plans to meet up with the army in the morning, as they get closer to Emon, they can take tonight to rest, and Keyleth can take a quick field trip. She can bring Allura to Zephyr and back, introduce Allura to her father, and they can return, and Allura can start coordinating the Air Ashari forces tonight, the way she has been doing for the rest of their armies.
Who wants to go see my hometown, you guys? Okay.
I feel like maybe
You know what? I wasn't looking at you, Scanlan.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can show you where I went to school.
Keyleth, we need to get back here as soon as
Yeah, no.
You went to school?
This,
Sorry.
That was catchy.
Keyleth, Vax, and Allura go through the Sun Tree to Zephyr, which Matt describes as a cliff-top village with huts that seem to be grown from branches rather than constructed. The top of the cliff is extremely windy, but as soon as they approach any of the buildings, the wind stops. Because obviously the wind druids can control how much wind actually goes through their hair at any given point. That's a really fun detail. I wonder if Matt knew he was going to have to describe this place when the session started, because he probably didn't. So he's either making all of this up on the spot, or he maybe had some loose ideas for a while for whenever they eventually came here, and now he just has to deploy whatever ideas he has in the moment, since the party basically came here with no warning. This is the fun part about running games for high-level groups, especially if they've got a druid in the party. They can pretty much go anywhere at any point. So you have to be really prepared or ready to improvise. Keyleth is so excited to show off her home, but almost immediately they are approached by someone riding a sky sail through the air, a form of transportation the druids use, and one that is a lot like Aang's glider from The Last Airbender, a comparison Marisha really appreciates considering Keyleth is accidentally inspired by Aang. But the rider who approaches them is actually her dad, Corrin, and it definitely makes sense that the leader of the tribe would probably want to investigate somebody new coming through the tree and approaching their village. But also, everyone in the party has been very clear that they shouldn't spend all day here in town. Matt has other things he wants the party to get done today, and so it's just efficient to put the party right in front of the person they wanted to talk to so they can get through the scene a little bit faster. The players start to explain their request, but Corrin remembers they were probably going to ask for their help at some point. And in fact, the Air Ashari have been watching the situation unfold remotely, so they know there are armies approaching Emon and they have been ready for this call. Matt is probably establishing this for a few reasons. First of all, speed. If Corrin's already in the loop, it helps us get through the scene without having to stop and explain the stakes to Corrin, because the Air Ashari already know what's up. Second, world-building verisimilitude. Of course, the druids would be able to watch the scene from afar. Scrying is a druid spell, so if you're going to establish that there are a bunch of high-level druids in one community, then of course they're going to be able to scry on the rest of the world, especially on Keyleth. Third, they're not passive. This huge situation is unfolding, and party members in any D&D game always want to know why everyone else isn't dropping everything to come help out, especially a powerful faction of druids. It would be insane if the Air Ashari had helped resolve the situation at Pyre and then just come home and acted like nothing had happened. So they haven't been doing nothing. They've been watching and preparing for their role in the coming battle, whenever they're called into action. Corrin mentions that he's sad that Keyleth is going to war. And at first, Keyleth reads it as disappointment, like she's doing something wrong. And she basically says, I'm just doing what I thought you wanted me to do. And he says, yeah, that's right, she is. But he's still sad that she has to go to war. He still worries about her as her father. And I really like her response to that.
You sent me on this path to prove myself worthy and a hero. I'm following what I thought you wanted of me.
You are, and I'm proud of you. I just want to do what I can to help safeguard that.
I will continue my duties,
Of course.
as I promised from the beginning,
Of course.
as those supersede being your daughter.
Of course.
It's a nice moment where she acknowledges that she wishes she didn't have to do what she's doing right now, asking a bunch of her people to go to war, but she also knows it's the right decision because they cannot win this battle without them. She suggests that the Ashari could even summon a storm to help disrupt the enemy wyverns, and that's a great idea, it will help a lot. The Ashari agree to leap into action when Keyleth sends a signal into the clouds. Once again, Matt handing over responsibility to Keyleth to decide when her people will join the battle. Corrin will be there in person as well, leading the army. Keyleth reintroduces Vax, and then they say their goodbyes. Corrin says when all this is done, she should finish her Aramente quickly and come back to them. They miss her. This is a nice touch from Matt to remind her not to keep postponing the last part of her rite of passage, which is especially important to do because this party loves to procrastinate. And Keyleth herself is kind of daunted by the sort of enormity of her rite of passage and the fact that it might be about to end, so she might need a little prompting to finish it up. And as Corrin leaves, they realize they never actually introduced him to Allura. She just sat back and did nothing because she was being played by the same guy Corrin was. But I kind of love the fact that Matt was just waiting for them to introduce her, and then they never did, so because she never spoke up and said anything, they technically didn't actually meet. But thankfully their interaction here, if you can call it that, will still allow Allura to cast spells and communicate with him from afar and help arrange the battle. So it wasn't a wasted trip, it was just kind of silly. Matt is getting ready for them to go to break, but before they do, Percy knocks on Vex's door.
I open the door, completely naked.
Oh!
What was it, dear?
It's a power play. I love it.
I don't remember, but it was mostly to head in this direction. Can I come in?
Sure, of course. Would you like to talk before or after?
I open the bag. I pull out the first bottle. This is called Direheart.
Oh.
I pull out the second one. This we simply call Courage. I pull out the third one. This is a Snowmead. I put it, and this is green tier whiskey.
Drink the Courage one now.
We're going to start with the Courage. And not talk about dragons. And I run in and shut the door.
All right. All
You
right.
just stepped on the whole thing, didn't you? Stepped on the whole thing.
I can't wait for the artwork.
This is the funny thing about having two players both trying to have a cinematic moment. Sometimes you wind up with competing visions. Percy/Taliesin clearly wanted a nice moment where he produces the drinks and maybe gives a speech about what they all mean to him, like what is their significance. Clearly he put a lot of thought into those drinks and their significance. Laura wanted a scene where they just cut through all the bullshit and fuck. Both of those can be romantic and hot in their own ways, but they're not really compatible. But it is the perfect representation of their romantic relationship. Both these characters are very type A, some might say they're both kind of control freaks. So pairing them together just leads to some really interesting interactions, and this is just the first one of those. After the break, Vax gives Vex the Boots of Haste, and she unattunes to the Bracers of Archery, so she can attune to those. Vax attunes to the Dragon Slayer Longsword and references how he's trying to get a handle on how it feels since he doesn't normally use swords. And Kashaw picks up on this and suggests that they spar, and we get a quick sparring scene. And do you remember in the last episode where I talked about how a lot of Critical Role analysis, or really any criticism of Critical Role, falls apart when the critic fails to factor in the kind of game Matt is running? Well, here we have another moment that perfectly captures the attitude of these players. There are some people who just don't get Critical Role, or just don't understand the mindset of these players. But honestly, if they do want to understand why Critical Role is so different from their own games, they just need to watch this clip.
And that is, I'm gonna use luck. It's
Please
the same
tell your
thing.
luck.
Dude, don't worry about to fight a fucking dragon! You're fighting Cash!
We're sparring!
You do realize
Friendly sparring!
you want to have. You're spending your life for.
I spent it already.
Yeah.
This is just so we're clear, everybody. I'm gonna switch back to Liam. This is a game. This is a game. Which camera's on me? This is a game.
Now, I think it is important to realize that Liam does not mean that they don't take their game seriously. Obviously they do. But if Liam wants to do something that he thinks is fun, like winning a sparring match with Kashaw, and he wants to use one of his very powerful resources, a luck point, in order to do so, really, what is the harm? And here's the thing. You might have an answer to that question. You might say, well, they should conserve as many of their resources as they can before the fight. It is a really bad strategy to use any of them for no reason before the most important fight of their lives. And that's fine, you're welcome to feel that way. Liam clearly doesn't think that's as big a deal as you might. Maybe he still trusts his friends to be powerful badasses who can take on a dragon without all of his powers, which would certainly be in line with how he often talks about how incredible his friends are, as if he's not also this superpowered hero. But also, and this is the really important part, but none of the rest of the cast members are mad at him either. They agree it's poor strategy, but when he says, who cares, it's fun, they laugh because they're all basically on the same page as him. For their group, that's an acceptable answer. If you're sitting at that table, it's possible you might not feel the same way. You might resent that a wasted luck point could mean that during the Thordak fight, he hits with 1 fewer attacks, deals 1 less dosage of sneak attack, Thordak has enough hit points to last 1 more round, and more members of the party are going to take damage as a result. But personally, I think D&D combat is so unpredictable that even if this fight goes seriously south, I doubt you could blame it on the absence of 1 luck point. But then again, if that's something that would bother you, then you prefer a more strategic table of players than the cast of Critical Role does. Not in terms of strategy of movement on the battlefield, but as far as their priorities between battles and a more strategic use of resources. And that's perfectly fine. But that also might be something to share with your fellow players before the campaign begins. There's a scene in Critical Role where Liam wastes a luck point for no reason the day of the ancient dragon fight, and I think it would really bother me if one of my fellow players was so careless with their resources. Tell your friends that. Make sure you're playing at the right table. But this scene has always been such a fantastic moment for me because it really demonstrates the mindset of these players, especially Liam, but by extension the rest of them as well. Anyway, Matt says they're not rolling damage on each other, just figuring out who can hit each other, because that is a resource he doesn't want them to deplete. They both get a solid hit on each other, and then Zara casts Eldritch Blast in the dirt between them to break up the fight. So, back to business. They need to go and talk with the general on the front lines, so they need to know if there's a tree near him, so they scry on Sildor, Vex and Vax's father. Because throughout all these strategy discussions today, somehow the players got it in their heads that Sildor would be leading the Elven army. So when they scry on him, they realize he's at home, in Singorn, with his daughter sitting on his knee. And they realize their mistake. They had basically convinced themselves that he would be there just because he was, well, I was going to say because he's a government official or because he said he would be helping with recruiting the army, but actually, it's really because they associate Singorn with Sildor. He's linked to that city in their minds. So when Singorn sends an army, they filled in the blanks and assumed he was coming. Also, nobody even comments on the fact that he's spending a lot more time with Valora than he ever did with the twins, which is sort of a shame. I wish they'd sort of talked about that a little bit in the episode, but oh well. However, the party also realizes War Master MacLeod Daxio is going to be leading the Emon forces, and both the Emon and Singorn forces will be together. Those armies are still united. But they need to figure out how to get to War Master MacLeod Daxio. Allura scries on him, and she can actually teleport the party directly to him. But not everyone they want to bring. Teleport can't bring the entire extended party. But once they're teleported over, Keyleth can open a transport via plants spell and bring everyone through, because according to Matt's ruling, the portal works both ways. She can open a portal from where Daxio is and open it in the Sun Tree, and the people near the Sun Tree can walk through. And speaking of this whole big party they want to bring with them, they're bringing Lady Kima, Jarrett, Gilmore, and Larkin is back. How convenient. Scanlan stays behind with that group to make sure they come through the tree. The party gets teleported to the war camp and they meet War Master MacLeod Daxio. He immediately refers to them as their strike force, doubling down on Allura's comments from earlier, because he's literally been in communication with her, so that's how she's been characterizing the party when discussing them with him. He tells them that the plan is to attack at sundown, and Kashaw immediately wants to know how are they going to attack. And Matt has had this entire session to take all the things Vox Machina, and especially Kashaw, want the armies to do and synthesize them into a strategic plan that the expert military general had already thought of.
We have broken up the regiments into 5 different segments. We're going to separate leading into the initial strike. We're going to simultaneously hit the 4 main gates, the north, south, east, and west side. The easternmost gate has already received quite a bit of damage. With all these simultaneous strikes, we're hoping to draw most of the army to the outer circles of the city. We're going to utilize this time to then shift our forces southward and instead push towards a singular gate in the southward position while they're scattered in that direction.
Anytime we go and we attack a gate, they're going to bring all of their forces to that gate. What they're not going to be suspecting is a wall being ripped down. And once you open a wall, you can't close it. You can close a gate.
What's the weakest wall?
That would be the eastern wall.
It's also near Grayskull Keep.
It's the arrow that you're going to use, yes.
While we are not in a position to use siege weaponry. We do have most of our magists at our disposal, and they have prepared a modicum of siege-based arcane spells at their disposal. So, I do not think piercing the outer wall will be an issue. It's what lies beyond it that our focus is going to be. So confusion, separate and destroy. They are not a very well organized army, and most of the creatures we've seen wandering the skies do so with nothing but bloodlust and the intent to rend and tear as their main driving force, and go. So, utilizing that technique that we've discussed, we will be entering the walls, we will be pushing forward, phalanx method with those that are shielded. We will be piercing through and scattering from the inside, breaking their ranks as much as possible, and doing our best to stay out of the skies, using alleyways, using small streets. We don't want our men being plucked out from the middle from their air support.
We will have air support.
Yes.
I called in assistance from the Airshari from the north. They're maintaining the skies.
If I can make a suggestion,
I was thinking like
Borrow the
20,
keys to the
30.
car.
Yeah.
if you get into the city,
How long are you going to be gone this
don't
weekend?
move through the alley. You're gonna scatter your forces. Move into the city and fortify a position. So then you've opened a gate inside the city. Move the command center inside the city and defend from there.
That is indeed part of our push. However, we are rather vulnerable from the air. So with the Ereshari giving us air support, that will allow us the ability to continue to push forward as a singular unit, from unit to unit in its own right.
Fantastic work from Matt here. He's not just taking all their suggestions and requests and folding them into the battle plan. Well, okay, he is doing that, and that's really cool. And it doesn't just feel like the party has been wasting their time by talking about stuff that he already knew to do, because he's specifically referencing conversations he's been having with Allura, so he's leapfrogging off of the plans they've already made. So that in and of itself is really good DMing. But also, when Cashon makes a suggestion for a strategy, Matt can't have this military master say, "Oh, thanks, we didn't think of that." Okay, that sounds so sarcastic so easily, which Matt can't do either. He wants this party to like this guy. But he also can't say that sincerely, because then the players won't feel like they can trust the siege of the city to an outsider. One of them is going to feel like they have to stay behind. So he can't say, "Oh, we didn't think of that." But Matt also knows his players, especially Will, want to feel like they are offering useful suggestions or doing something to help the siege go more smoothly. So he also can't just say, "Don't worry, we're taking care of that." So Matt has Daxio respond by basically saying, "I wish we didn't have to scatter our forces through the alleys. You're absolutely right, but we're too vulnerable from the air, we don't have air support." Which opens the door for Marisha to feel like she got something valuable out of recruiting her people. Keyleth can announce, "Don't worry, we do have air support." And this means Daxio can change his plans, which means he can now follow Will's suggestion. It makes both those players feel like they're contributing to the success of the battle in their own ways. Just some really fantastic dungeon mastering from Matt there. The party asks about the 50 men from Fort Daxio, and War Master Daxio says they haven't shown up yet. The party's forgotten that Daxio is a few days away. It's very unlikely they're going to get here in time for the battle, but Matt doesn't want to tell them that because they seem pretty comfortable with the plan so far. Matt can just replace those 50 men with another regiment he's already established, so it's in his best interest to just ignore it and move on. Let the players think that all their resources are being used in the fight, even though these soldiers have no way to get here. Because if Matt points that out, the players are going to start wasting resources trying to bring the soldiers through, and that's not going to be a productive way to spend the next, let's be honest, 30 to 45 minutes of that session. So he lets them believe that they're probably going to get here before the fight and doesn't correct them. That being said, weirdly, Matt then puts his players in exactly the same position he was just in, because Daxio references the fact that Topher Bertoris, Brom Goldhand, and Seeker Assume are all within the city, and will be able to help with the battle once the soldiers reach them. But the party knows that Brom and Assume are still in Whitestone. They didn't bring them back with them through the tree. But they don't really tell Daxio that. They discuss it quickly under their breath, and then they move on from the subject, because it's not important to tell him that the resources he was expecting to be in the city won't be there when there's nothing he can do about that right now. I would actually argue that maybe you should tell him, because they should know that there's not going to be a cleric they're looking for. An individual cleric on the battlefield could make a huge difference, so they should probably know that they can't rely on that resource. But Matt has also clearly established there are a bunch of mages within the army, so the party's probably hoping that it won't make or break the battle to not have these 3 adventurers on the battlefield. The party also mentions the storm that the Ereshari are bringing, and Matt draws their attention to the fact that they can actually see it on the horizon. Dark storm clouds getting closer. This is another moment that's obvious once you know how to look for it, once you watch a lot of Matt's games. The players mention the storm, and Matt internally realizes, oh yeah, I should probably make sure they can see it already so they don't start wondering whether it'll be here in time, like they have been about every resource they've been discussing throughout this entire session. Let's make sure they know it's on their way, it's already visible, they can rely on it being here by the time the fighting begins. Sure, it slipped his mind, he's only human, but once he remembers it exists, he makes sure they know about it so they can relax and just trust that everything they've set up will pay off during the battle. Daxio encourages the party to get into position beneath the city sooner rather than later, so that way, when the army launches their attack, Vox Machina is already in position and ready to strike. The players mention they can send up a flare, and Daxio requests a signal that's not so obviously a declaration of attack, which basically means Matt is hinting that Keyless should send up a signal in a Skywrite spell, the same thing the Ashari asked her to do. That way they only have to send up one signal. However, Daxio urges them to send up a signal that would be not an obvious declaration of attack. They need something that would be noticeable, that would not be normal, but also is not a clear starting gun if you don't know there's an army out there. And Percy lands on the idea of a perfect circle of clear sky, the eye of a hurricane. That's perfect. And also the exact thing that these nerds who are currently obsessing over Hamilton would probably love. I'm surprised they all didn't start immediately singing Hurricane. The players start moving toward Greyskull Keep so they can take their tunnel under the wall and get into the city sewer network. And Matt narrates the other soldiers, noticing them as they walk through the regiments, and some of the soldiers recognize a few of them. And this actually opens the door for one of my favorite improvised moments from Wilfredell.
Dale? Where you been, man?
Wait, Cash?
What the hell's going on?
That's the biggest
Going to die today. What are you doing?
Pretty much the same thing, man. How's Ann?
Anne's not doing too well.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, she was in the city when the dragons attacked.
No. She wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible.
It's okay. We're gonna kill him today, right?
We're getting there, buddy. Good to see you. You're looking good.
To see you too. You too.
All right, I'll see you later, man.
All right.
I haven't seen that guy in forever.
What's that?
So bizarre. Let's go.
Put it like
They enter Greyskull Keep and they find evidence that people have been there while the party was gone. Food has been eaten, rooms have been raided, but nobody's there now. They pick up Percy's cask of black powder from his lab, and Vax confirms their secret passage is undisturbed. Phrasing mine, and also phrasing. So they head under the tunnel, and once they're down there, they pass out the healing potions and the potions of fire resistance, and they give Vax the potion of invulnerability. They don't drink any of these things yet, though. They debate doing a hero's feast, but they don't have the time. It takes an hour, they're only 40 minutes from sunset, and they're not even in position yet. So Matt says, look, you had no rush when you had the feast last night, so you could have chosen to not do the feast right at sundown. You could have waited for the opportunity to do it at the perfect time. He normally doesn't backtrack like that, but in this case, he does not want to relitigate the time that they took their feast. He just says, fuck it, you're fine. Although I think Whitestone actually might be in a different time zone than Emon, so theoretically, they could still have an hour left on their hero's feast before it expires, so you wouldn't actually need to handwave it. I do actually think they're okay. They need to head up to the surface and enter the city in order to access the clasped tunnels, and Scanlan can make them all look like lizard folk, but Gilmore also turns himself and the twins invisible, so they can better sneak through the city. They move through the city streets, and Matt doesn't even have them roll. No deception, no performance, no stealth. My guess is either Matt felt like they had a good plan and had taken steps necessary to avoid detection, so he didn't feel like they needed to roll. Or he just wants to get them under the tunnels. They enter the clasp tunnels, and eventually they hear voices ahead. A small group of people trying to figure out where they can relocate to next. And then they notice the players approaching and start to run down the tunnel, but Vax calls out to them.
I used to be one of you. I used to be Clasp.
And then I took an arrow to the knee.
But the voices of Vex and Vax are coming from nowhere, and these figures in the tunnel just look like lizard folk, since that's what the rest of Vox Machina looks like to them. Vax and Vex try to explain that it's just a magic spell to hide them, and Matt has them roll Persuasion with disadvantage, and they both roll 1s. So these members of the clasp run away down the tunnel. The party runs after them and keeps trying to defuse the situation. They drop the illusion, they call out to them, they mention Garthok, but every time they try to fix the situation, Matt considers how to adjudicate it, and then just says that double 1s is a tough thing to overcome. And he clearly wants to honor that roll, because if there's no consequence to failing to persuade the clasp, he shouldn't have had them roll, especially if there's no consequence for double 1s. They chase the wow, I cannot get through that sentence. They chase the clasp agents through the tunnels for 10 minutes, which seems wild that they wouldn't be able to do anything to resolve that problem, but even setting aside that earlier point, Matt is trying to get them through these tunnels quickly, and he's trying to get them closer to the timeline of the attack to raise the stakes. But Matt tells them that eventually they hear a door slam ahead of them. Scanlan calls through the door, and he's able to get them an audience through the door, at least someone's talking to them on the other side, and Scanlan offers them half the gold from Thordak's hoard. That's enough to get the door open and bring them into a room with 30 clasp members, all of whom are very much on edge. And even here, Matt describes that these agents feel some relief when they see powerful members of Vox Machina show up. But then that is followed by tension since they don't know Vox Machina's motives, and presumably, if the party is coming with nefarious intentions, these agents don't know if they could take Vox Machina in a fight. Matt is once again using this as an opportunity to remind the players that they are basically the big guns now. Anyone who looks at them, from the soldiers outside to the spies in the sewers, recognizes that our heroes are very high level. But Matt also wants to make sure that players don't just feel like the clasp has been waiting for the party to swoop in and take over the situation. There's still tension here. But also Matt doesn't end up having them roll anything because they just promised half of the gold in Emon to the clasp. I think that may have done the job. So the clasp agents rush Vox Machina through the tunnels towards the center of the city, and as they run, they hear thunder and rain from above, and they hear restless wyverns roaring. Thordak's forces also know something's up. As they run, they feel the tunnels warming up, and they're passing tunnels that have collapsed. They're getting closer to the volcanic pocket in the heart of the city. And at one point, they actually see some molten rock oozing through one of the collapsed tunnels and leaking into the sewer, and they have to inch their way around it. And the final tunnel they enter has been warped by the devastation above. It might have even been carved out by the clasp, or at the very least, it's one of the few tunnels in the heart of the city that has more or less survived Thordak's terraforming process, but it's looking pretty rough. And as they're a few minutes away from the heart of the city, they hear a huge roar echo from the streets above them. Thordak is now on the same page as the wyverns. Something's going on, but he doesn't know what. The clasp agent brings them to a crooked and broken tunnel leading up to the street, wishes them luck, and runs back down the tunnels. They climb to the street and they see the gates leading into the Cloudtop district, and beyond the gates, the party can see a column of smoke leading up from what can only be Thordak's lair. The rain's pouring down around them, but it's basically evaporating before it even hits the ground. Blackened and burnt bodies hang on chains as either a warning or just grotesque decor, and there are 2 fire giants standing guard. The party debates how to get rid of these guys because Sam is incredibly insistent that they cannot waste resources fighting them in combat. They have to save as much as they can for the real fight. But Kasha and Zara can hear Vox Machina trying to come up with a way to lead these fire giants away, but not coming up with anything they think will actually work. So Zara says they need a real distraction, and Zara and Cash can handle that. They will attack the fire giants and try to hold them back so the party can rush straight to Thordak. They look like they want to debate this. The party does not feel good about sacrificing their friends to this fight, but Matt describes that they hear a horn blow in the distance. Shit is about to pop off. They do not have time for a better plan. And Matt probably realizes this is the perfect plan. It means 2 guest players are writing themselves out of the Thordak fight, so Matt does not have to balance that next encounter for 2 extra player characters being on the battlefield, or worry about the logistics of asking them back to the table and making sure their schedules are clear. This also means the party is burning a huge resource to deal with these 2 fire giants. I typically love when my players are willing to just burn a resource in order to solve a problem, and usually, if the resource is significant enough, like a spell slot or being prepared to take some damage, or a class feature they can only use once a day, then I'm a lot less likely to make them roll for whatever they're trying to achieve. This is kind of the perfect scenario where nobody would really need to roll anything in my game, because no matter what happens next, the players are losing an extremely valuable resource before a fight with an ancient red dragon. So typically in my games, we would probably handle this scene cinematically and allow the heroic sacrifice moment to play out. Now, when I call it a heroic sacrifice, I do not necessarily mean that Cash and Zara will die here. And I also definitely don't mean that you shouldn't roll to find out how this battle is going to end. Like, that's just not what you should do in this session. That's something you could come back to later if you want to meet up with Mary and Will for a 2-person game and resolve the fire giant fight. Or just treat them like the rest of the battle outside the gates. If the fight with Thordak goes well, then the battle for Emon goes well, and the fire giant fight also goes well. But right now it is still a heroic sacrifice, not just because they could die, but because they're giving up on the goal of helping the party fight an ancient red dragon. However, Matt does not handle this cinematically, which I can respect. It's not how I would do it, but I get it. He wants to have the players at least make sure they can actually get past these giants without taking damage or getting captured. They emerge from the sewers and the storm is getting stronger around them, and they literally see a wyvern get struck by lightning and tumble out of the sky. Okay, that part was very cinematic. Zara makes herself look like a lizard folk, emerges from the tunnel, casts Savard's black tentacles on the giants, and Matt has the fire giants roll against it, but they both fail their saves and get restrained by the tentacles. One of them shouts out a warning in giant that they are under attack. Keyleth creates the eye in the storm above them, and as soon as she does so, Matt describes how there's a bunch more lightning strikes from the storm, taking out more of the wyverns. Funnel clouds start appearing, and druids on sky sails are visible in the sky, and they hear an explosion from one of the city walls. Matt's telling them that this signal just set off the battle. But Matt also describes that the players have to rush between the 2 fire giants. They are still within reach of the fire giants because they're only 15 feet apart. And if the players dash with their action, they can use their entire turns to just get to the point where they're right between the giants, which means there's definitely still a chance that they're about to get hit by fire giants. The giants use their actions to try to break free, but they both fail. Grog punches the gate and breaks it open, and the party rushes through, and Matt has the twins and Grog roll dexterity saving throws to avoid the giants' attacks of opportunity. Again, I mentioned this in the last episode of this series, using dexterity saves is a way better way to handle an attack from a giant. The party avoids the attacks, and Matt asks for Mary and Will to make attacks on those giants. And the fact that the giants seem hell-bent on stopping Vox Machina from getting through the gates rather than getting distracted by Cash and Zara, I think indicates why Matt wanted to play out this scene with rolls rather than handling it as a cutscene. because these giants were specifically tasked with keeping people out of the Cloudtop district. So they're not being distracted by the adventurers who are staying behind. They're trying to stop the adventurers who are rushing through. Because fire giants are big, but they're not dumb. They know the adventurers who are rushing past them are the real threat they have to deal with. However, once they've made their attacks and it's gotten back to the players' turns and they've moved forward through the gates, Matt describes how Kashaw notices some fire elementals begin leaping out of the burning buildings on the street and beginning to surround him and Zara. But the party's made it through the gates, and they're on their way to Thordak's lair. So Cash and Zara prepare for this epic, off-screen battle. And this is how Matt transitions to handling this cinematically, at least for the purposes of this session. I honestly wonder if Matt included this detail of the fire elemental surrounding them because he wanted to make it unambiguous that Cash and Zara are going to be tied up with other foes, and this could wind up being a heroic sacrifice. Because 2 fire giants might not have necessarily sold that idea. I think these 2 could take them. But I also think Matt is foreshadowing the fact that there might be some surprise fire elementals lurking in the burning buildings, and so maybe the party will encounter some of them during the Thordak fight in the next episode. The party runs through the ruined Cloudtop district and approaches the wall of the smoldering crater, and then Thordak emerges from over that crater.
That moment quickly shifts as you're walking through this volcanic fume. The air itself is sulfurous, and there are gouts of poison that just spill forth from cracked earth. You can see points, little bursts of glowing molten rock that kind of break through the surface and kind of pour and then cool and create these small, like miniaturized volcanic spires. You can see the burned and destroyed, crumbled remnants of the buildings, the noble houses, the beautiful mansions that used to make up the entirety of the Cloudtop district. The homes that you would look at and think, God, one day it would be great to live in something as beautiful as that, reduced to ash and cinder. Your run slows as you begin to see this large crater wall that lifts up through the smoke, a lip that then vanishes over the edge where the smoke is just pouring out like a thick column, a slow-moving, stationary tornado of black that just pours into the sky. As you watch it, 2 large, bulbous, scaled red arms shoot forth from the center as one long, unfurling dragon neck rises up. You also notice that within its chest, this large, thick scar, but no crystal. Just a large, bulbous, grown over thick piece of scaled scar. As it stands towering above all of you, just peering over the distance, not even noticing you in the moment, just kind of surveying the chaos around an Emon. Its face drops, and you just hear this voice gurgle up from within. Sourceless almost in its immensity and its encompassing nature, just says, "It appears that we have guests. Where are you?" That's where we'll end tonight's session.
Obviously, the most noteworthy moment here is that he's describing Thordak as on alert, but that he doesn't necessarily know where the party is just yet. Which basically means that when the next session opens, the party is perhaps going to have an opportunity to strike first when he hasn't had his turn in initiative yet, which I'm sure is the only thing Vax wants, so he can get his Assassinate feature with the Dragon Slayer longsword. But also, I really love the way Matt describes the ruins of the Cloudtop district. I love the ruined buildings, the pools of magma, the vents of volcanic gas. I love the idea that this next encounter is going to take place in and around the ruins of this high-status neighborhood. And as we saw from the Kevdak fight, the Ripley fight, and the Pit Fiend fight, Matt's players really engage with the terrain a lot when there's a lot of elevation on the battlefield. And so wouldn't it be a shame if the next episode basically has nothing like that and the arena for the final fight of the final boss, the entire Krogma Conclave storyline, was just an empty arena? Here's the thing, and I want to do some real talk with you here. I think there are only 2 bad episodes of the first Critical Role campaign. Episode 27, which is just an extremely frustrating experience for everyone involved, and episode 72, which I've always thought was just super boring. The only interesting thing that happens to me in that entire episode is the kiss between Percy and Vax, and the rest of the episode just does nothing for me. Now, the next episode, episode 79, is not a bad episode. It's a really fun episode to watch. The fight is interesting. The players are incredibly engaged. But from the perspective of a dungeon master, well, Matt makes a lot of decisions I would not have made, which is fine. We're different people. But some of those decisions in the next episode are kind of baffling. And we're going to try to understand those decisions. We're going to try to get into his head and see why he made the choices he did, because even if we don't agree with them, we can at least try to understand them. But the whole goal of this series is to apply lessons to our own games, and I think there are a lot of choices in the next episode that we can learn from as maybe an example of what not to do. And I'll probably say lots of nice things too. This is not going to be a takedown video, but I'm just letting you know the next episode's going to be kind of long, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. Matt does some things in this next fight that I have a hard time recommending you do in your own games. But while we're on the subject of real talk and the subject of understanding why people do things that they do, even if we don't agree with them, now it's time to talk about politics. I told you no politics in this video so far, but now that we're here, it's time for politics, a topic that has not come up at all in the video before right now. And as I promised, we're going to talk about the Democrats. And as usual, on my channel, when I refer to Democrats or Republicans, I'm talking about the lawmakers and the politicians. I'm not talking about voters. You might disagree with that terminology. You might call yourself a Democrat or a Republican. That's fine, but that's not what I'm talking about today. It's usually not what I'm talking about at all, actually, on this channel. I'm making that clear because I get a lot of comments that are like, you hate all Republicans, and I want to clarify, I don't hate groups of voters. I don't think that's productive. I have some strong disagreements with some groups of voters, but mainly I want to talk about the politicians. That's the more useful place I spend my energy. And today we're talking about the Democrats. Not out of the interest of fairness. I'm not going to be talking about Republicans one video, Democrats the next, out of some misguided attempt at balance. But there's something I want to talk about today, and it involves the Democrats. Because around the time I recorded my last Critical Role Demystified video, there was a ton of chatter about Gavin Newsom probably running for president. It's not confirmed. This is not confirmed when I'm recording this, but AP News wrote about all the Democrats who are starting to lay the groundwork for a presidential run, and Newsom was right at the top of that list. And that's hardly a surprise. He's been clearly leading up to that for several years now. And so since we're doing some real talk today, I just have to say, please don't let Gavin Newsom be the Democratic nominee for president. You see, I complain about the Republicans a lot on this channel because the Republican Party is bad and every single policy on their platform is evil. And every once in a while, commenters bring up what I think are very legitimate grievances with the Democratic Party, and they'll wonder why I don't discuss them more on my channel, in my community posts or in my videos. And the short answer is I tend to talk about current events that frustrate me, but that I also want to talk about stuff that I think will still be relevant by the time the video comes out, whenever that might be. And so most of the time during a Trump presidency where the Republicans control every branch of government and are doing untold damage to our country that'll be in place for generations, that tends to be my priority. My sentiment on the subject of talking about Democrats on this channel was actually summed up really well by, of all people, Aaron Sorkin.
And by the way, I'd be happy to take shots at the Democrats too, if only one of them would say or do something.
I'm not going to pretend Aaron Sorkin and I see eye to eye on how the Democratic Party should spend its time and energy. I'm just trying to point out that this is not a new criticism of the party. That episode is 19 years old. When I get frustrated with the Democrats, I'm frustrated because they're not doing what I want them to do, what I wish they would do, what I believe a majority of their base wants them to do. Even if you've resigned yourself to the fact that they currently have no institutional power to implement any progress or change, I'm still frustrated by the fact that they're not doing anything to actually combat the Trump presidency in any meaningful, visible way. On the other hand, when I get frustrated with the Republicans, it's because they're trying to demolish human rights. So, like I said earlier, it's not at all that the Democrats are above criticism, just that what the Republicans are doing is a lot worse, which is why I talk about them more. Because probably the biggest problem with the Democrats is their complete lack of action. I think about that perfect tweet that really sums it up so well. The last decade has been the Democrats clinging to the rulebook going, but a dog can't play basketball, while a dog fucking dunks on us over and over. That tweet is 8 years old. Nothing changes. And you know what? Credit to Gavin Newsom. He is doing things to actually combat the Trump presidency in potentially meaningful and definitely visible ways. He's been speaking out against the ICE raids. He's pushed back against Trump sending the National Guard to Los Angeles. And when Fox News claimed Trump had talked to Newsom about sending the National Guard to Los Angeles, Newsom not only denied it, but he sued them and got them to walk back the story. And he sued them for almost exactly as much as they were sued by Dominion, and that's a very deliberate choice. When Trump canceled the plans for a high-speed rail in California, Newsom sued over that as well. When Trump threw out one of his signature threats to have Newsom arrested, because you know how the president just casually wonders if he should openly use the Justice Department against his political enemies, and that's just part of the world we live in now? But Newsom basically said, you know where to find me. I'd rather you arrest me than all these innocent people. He's also drawing attention to the fact that Trump is pressuring Texas to redraw their electoral map so they can take more House seats, and he's promising to do the same thing with California to get more Democrat seats, which is easier said than done, but the point is, Newsom's actually willing to use some of the same tactics the Republicans are using. Rather than worrying about the precedent the Republicans might set, he's using their precedent to actually react and counter their moves. Rather than just clinging to the rulebook, he's going to go find a basketball-playing dog that can actually play for our team. It's this moment from the criminally underrated film, The Town.
This is the not fucking around crew. So find me something that looks like a print so I can grab one of these assholes and shake their tree, because this not fucking around thing is about to go both ways.
And I have seen a lot of people online praising Newsom for actually, doing stuff. There's been a whole stand culture around him, which, gross, but whatever. I guess when you fight back against authoritarianism, that means you have zaddy energy, or I don't really know what that means, but I think I hate it. But here's the thing. Gavin Newsom is not a useful ally. We do not want him to be our advocate. We do not want him in the White House. You know that clip of John Hamm from The Town? He's playing the bad guy. Gavin Newsom has a bunch of policies I don't agree with, but I actually don't even think I need to discuss policy to highlight why he is absolutely the wrong choice for the Democratic ticket in 2028. See, Gavin Newsom has a podcast where he frequently invites on right-wing reactionaries and far-right conservatives, launders their ideas for his presumably literal audience, and nods along with them while they say horrible things about, for example, transgender people in sports. And they hide it all under the veneer of respectability and fairness, but it's transphobia. He's opening the door for more transphobia to enter a political party that definitely already has a transphobia problem. So he's either trying to appeal to a more conservative audience because he wants to chase the center vote, or even potentially poach some voters from the right, which is a doomed strategy. It's always a doomed strategy. Democrats, please stop running to the center. Stop chasing the right. It doesn't work. Or he is genuinely trying to take the Democratic Party further towards the right by doubling down on the myth that Kamala Harris lost the election because she was too supportive of trans rights, which is absolutely not true. But it's a convenient excuse for Democrats who are extremely conservative and just want to throw the left under the bus. Or, third option, Gavin Newsom is inviting fascists and white supremacists on his podcast because he's fucking stupid. And all three of those answers are completely disqualifying for a presidential candidate. On paper, I get how Gavin seems like the best case scenario, because the Democrats kind of suck shit right now, and so maybe Gavin Newsom is the best we can do. But if we accept that framing, if we accept that he's the best we can do, we're buying into the current failings of the Democratic Party. Because he also represents the Democratic Party continuing to run to the right after every election loss. I know it's tempting to get behind a Democrat who is at least doing the bare minimum to oppose fascists. I wish there were more of those. But what we actually need is a Democrat who, believes in things? Is that too much to ask? And look, if he gets the nomination, and he's not running unopposed, if there's another horrible Republican running against him, which there will be, would I vote for Gavin Newsom? Well, I voted for both Biden and Kamala despite some pretty serious flaws with both those candidates, because if you're dying in the desert and someone gives you a choice of drinking a bottle of swamp water or drinking a bottle of hydrochloric acid, I guess I'll go with the one that's still technically water, the one that will still be very bad for me, but won't kill me instantly. But this is what happened with Kamala, right? I think she was probably a better candidate than Newsom. She doesn't seem to be an actual sociopath like he is, but she had some pretty serious flaws. Chief among them, the fact that she did not come out and fully condemn Biden's support for the genocide in Gaza. Part of me really hoped that she was just stuck between a rock and a hard place. She didn't support the genocide, but she couldn't speak out against Biden. And I did feel like there was some evidence that could be the case that could support that claim. Like, she took a private meeting with Netanyahu, and then he started trying really hard to get Trump elected. So maybe there were some signs there that she was supportive of trying to end the genocide. But I also have to be honest with myself and say that at a certain point, that's just cope, right? Because she had more than enough opportunities to signal that that was her position. And if I was right, and she just felt like she couldn't stand up for what she actually valued because she would face too much political pressure, well then, how useful would she be as an ally? Don't we instead want someone who will stand up for what's right, even if they think it might be unpopular with some of the leadership of their party? If someone isn't willing to do that, will they stand up for us? But I also believe that even if she was very likely going to continue funding the genocide when she got into office, there was at least some chance that you might be able to speak out against it under her administration and maybe change the course of things. Not just because she clearly demonstrated willingness to cave to political pressure, obviously, but also because Donald Trump's a huge piece of shit who would gladly escalate the situation in Gaza and would never listen to activists on the left. I don't know if protesting the genocide during the Harris presidency would have worked or not. I legitimately don't know. But I did know that protesting the genocide during a Trump presidency was always going to be doomed to fail. And if they're both going to be bad on Gaza, then you have to also go for the one who's not also going to completely set trans rights back 20 or 30 years, who won't launch this massive militarized assault on immigrants, who's not going to light our money on fire with asinine tariff policies. I guess I take the swamp water over the hydrochloric acid. I know not everyone agrees with me, and I get that. Not about who they vote for, but I mean that there is a very reasonable counter-argument to the position of vote blue no matter who, which is that the Democrats know they don't have to work that hard for voters on the left because they know they're not going to lose those voters. At least they're not going to lose them to the right. They might lose them entirely, which I would argue does happen, but they focus instead on chasing the center and running to the right because that makes their wealthy donors happy. I know that when some people see the trolley problem, they just don't want to flip the switch at all. They don't want to touch it because they don't want to get their hands dirty. But from my perspective, you have to do everything you can to stop the trolley and get people off the tracks. But if you can't do that before the trolley hits the fork in the road, then that first Tuesday in November, you at least have to switch the track to the option that is objectively going to be the least harmful. And then you can resume the pressure and keep trying to get everyone off the trolley and get everyone off the tracks. Will you succeed? We can never know. But it's easier to stop a trolley and get people off the tracks when you're not actively running people over and getting blood everywhere. It's easier to try to protest Gaza when you're not also dealing with ICE literally detaining and deporting people for absolutely no good reason. And you're not going to teach the trolley a lesson by not participating in the system, because I don't know if the trolley's ever going to learn. Despite the obvious lessons staring them in the face, the Democrats seem completely unable to learn from this moment. They don't seem to understand that people drink swamp water when they have no other choice, but a lot of them are not going to campaign for swamp water. They're not going to be able to pitch swamp water to their friends without spending most of their time talking about how bad hydrochloric acid is for you. They might be right, of course, but this only works if everyone understands that they're going to wind up dying in the desert if they don't drink something. So they can't just not drink something, otherwise they're going to be fed the option they wanted the least. This metaphor is getting away from me a little bit, but I'm also really encouraged by the success of someone like Zoran Mamdani. We'll see what happens when we get to the actual election, and New York mayors in general have a pretty short honeymoon period, and we obviously know that the attacks are going to get really brutal from basically all sides. He's going to have to weather quite a storm. And let's be real, I absolutely have no idea if the Democrats can even get their shit together enough to replicate that success on the national level. Certainly by 2028, that feels very unlikely. But also, look what happens when people are actually excited to vote for somebody and not just against somebody. So look, there's not a ton we can do right now about the 2028 election, but you know what we can do? Pressure other Democrats to step up and do some of what Newsom is doing. Make sure he's not the only one taking a stand, because if he is, then he's the only one anybody's going to see, and so they're going to vote for him because it seems like there are no other options. And we need other options. Because Gavin Newsom wants to be president so bad. And he would be the president so bad. Also, I am enormously sympathetic to anybody who feels that using terminology like the trolley problem is reductive when we're talking about the catastrophic human rights abuses happening in Gaza. I think it's a useful metaphor when we're discussing electoral politics, but the truth is, the situation in Gaza is nothing like people being strapped to the tracks of a trolley. These are real human beings, civilians, children, who are not only being murdered, but we've reached the point where they are now facing truly unimaginable levels of starvation, where even if everything stops now and goes back to whatever normal passes for in that region, where they're still in an open-air prison, and there would still be lifelong consequences to some of the people who are suffering the starvation. These children will suffer for the rest of their lives. And we're also at the point where a lot of Democrats finally feel comfortable calling the events in Gaza a genocide, because now they want to be on the right side of history. And whenever anybody changes their minds and comes around to our position, I want to be supportive of that. But when it's the Democrats, when it's Obama, you have to ask, where was the support for Gaza when Biden was president? Where was the support when Palestinians wanted to speak at the DNC in support of Harris? I don't think she lost the election over Gaza. I think there were ultimately other issues with her campaign's messaging that failed to win over voters. But the Democrats' overwhelming failure to denounce Israel's genocide certainly did not help get voters energized. I haven't really been talking about Gaza that much in my videos. I made a video about it last year, and I discussed it in a few of my community posts, but it's been hard to talk about. And a lot of my videos, I just don't know what to say about it because it feels helpless. The weight of all that suffering and the complicity of both of our political parties is just so horrible. It's too horrible to comprehend sometimes. But there are some very helpful comments that I got that brought it to my attention that if someone didn't watch the Thanos video or didn't read my community posts, if they only watch my Critical Role videos, they've never actually heard me voice my support for the people of Gaza. And that is definitely something that needs to be remedied. I was also reminded of this fact by a fantastic NerdSync video about the new Superman movie, which I haven't seen yet, so no spoilers in the comments, please. But Scott used the opportunity to use that video as a perfect platform to reaffirm support for Palestine and the condemnation of Israel's war crimes. And so, since this part of the video is literally about the Democrats failing to denounce Israel's genocide in Gaza, I would be remiss if I didn't use my platform the way I'm advocating others should. So yeah, in case it wasn't clear from everything I've said today, Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. The United States is complicit. We must stop providing weapons and funding to Israel. We must demand a ceasefire, and Palestine must be free. Anyway, thanks for watching this episode of Critical Role Demystified. We should be back in 2 weeks to discuss episode 79, Thordak. Look at that, Oddwick. 2 Critical Role Demystified episodes in 3 weeks. That's pretty good for me lately. And right now, the next one should go out in 2 weeks on, or very close to, August 21st. That's so exciting. I know, right? We are back. I know we had a bit of a bumpy road earlier this year, but it seems like things have finally evened out a little bit more. I don't think we should be getting a bunch more of those delays. I'm building up a buffer as well, so now if something goes wrong, it shouldn't completely derail the schedule like what happened earlier this year. It seems like things are finally, maybe, hopefully, getting back to normal for this channel.
Oh
know you'd like to think so, but you won't make it to episode 79, because your next video will be your last.